So you have a self-storage facility under contract. Congratulations. Now what? Well, let's talk about that. My name's Mark Helm. I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Quick Start Academy. And I support smaller investors who want to get in the self-storage business or who want to grow their self-storage business, strategically do so in a way that creates true wealth and a fulfilling career. And we're in the Getting Started series, and we now have a property under contract, and the clock is ticking. Now, this can be one of the most exciting, one of the most terrifying, one of the most exhilarating, and one of the scariest processes you'll ever go through. And that's all normal, and that's just know and just be ready to expect it. Now, here's one thing I will coach you on. I don't care what the deal is. Every deal is going to throw you a surprise sometime during that transaction. I don't think I've ever done a deal that hasn't, and we've done a number of deals. And just know that and expect that. Know that something out of left field is going to come at you at some point during the transaction, and you're ready for it. I just don't know what it'll be. In this series, we're covering the spaces one goes through as they get in or grow their self-storage business, and I'm focused on the business environment of today's market. Now, what we're talking about are the spaces one goes through, because look, every buyer's different, every facility's different, every deal's different, every way each buyer is organized is a little bit different. So there will be a lot of nuances that will be a function of all of that. But there are some similar spaces every deal goes through. So I want to talk about the spaces of the due diligence period now. So you've got the property standing still. Now the seller's sitting back. Well, the seller's giving you what you're asking for, and then they sit back and they're letting you do your thing. So what is your thing? So let's talk about the spaces that you go through as a buyer when you have your facility under contract. Now, the general spaces are 5, and let's talk about them right now. So you'll have the physical inspections, you'll have the feasibility report, you'll have the financial analysis and analysis of their books and records. You have the loan approval process, and you have all the legal and title work. So those are the main spaces that you go through. Now the trick is, the reality is, you pretty much got to have to go through them simultaneously. So it's not like you do one and go to the next. They're all happening at once. You know, the day we get a property standing still, sometimes even before the contract, I will start engaging on the feasibility report. But let's go through them in that order that I just listed. So the first space is the inspection space. So how are you going to physically inspect that property? Now, I've done it a lot of ways. I've had some really work, and I've had some that were not so good. So in general, there's like a few different 3 ways that I see that you can do an inspection. The first is to literally have a contractor, somebody in the commercial construction business, go through and look at the buildings, and they're looking for any particular problems. This can work very well, and I've done that. I've used our staff, I've used our contractors, where they've gone through and they'll say, this looks good, or you may have a roof leak here, or this HVAC looks like it needs to be looked at. Very often you can get very good information from these contractors. Sometimes the downside is that they don't always write necessarily best reports. If a lender or your partners are looking for good inspection reports, you know, contractors are builders. They're not for the most part, they don't do reports very well. They tend to be a little less expensive than other options, and very often can perform very well. For a number of years, I would have our crews, our maintenance people, and a contractor I'm working with go through and look at the properties and tell me where I needed to focus and where I needed more inspections. That's one way to do it. The next way to do it is there, in some places there are commercial building inspectors, and you can hire those, and that's a good, valid way to go. My only coaching is, if you find commercial building inspectors, make sure you negotiate, because typically they'll charge by the square foot, and sometimes on these facilities there can be a lot of square footage. A building inspector, a commercial building inspector, may be able to inspect a 100,000 square foot facility in about the same amount of time it would take them to inspect a 10,000 square foot office building. So just make sure you negotiate a good rate. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, we have hired the erectors, literally the contractors who put up the building systems for the self-storage fabricators to go in. Very similar to the first one, except these are people that do nothing but build self-storage. And finally, where we have settled on is, we have an engineer of record for our company. So we have a head engineering company, and no matter what market we're going in, this engineering company will oversee the approval process and the work and the expansion and the construction work in all of our different markets. And at this point, I just call that engineering company and send them the information I have from the package, and they will assemble a team and go handle the inspections for me. Yes, I may pay a little bit more for that than I could in another way, but if it looks like there's drainage issues, they will have a special engineer there to look at the drainage. If it looks like a fairly simple process, they'll have a construction person from their company there. They will fly drones over the roof. So that's kind of where we have gotten to in order to do our inspections. But whatever it is, do the physical inspections. You'd be surprised some of the things that we end up finding. We have found roofs that aren't the right length. We have found buildings that have slipped off their foundation. We have found facilities with all kinds of drainage issues. So do not skip over that. And if you're doing just raw land, it is typically your civil engineer that's going to drive that. They will tell you, you need the geotech and it needs to be here, and you need the topo survey. Let your civil engineer drive the inspections if it's raw land, or if it's land for the expansion on a facility. Now, the second space is the feasibility report. You've done a preliminary analysis of the market, but always get a feasibility report. I'm telling you, the only reason I'm standing here right now in front of this camera is because I've gotten feasibility reports. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be considered someone who knows anything about self-storage. Why? Because I would have been out of business a long time ago, especially in the markets that you think you know the best. That's where you need the feasibility report. I've told this story before. I remember early in my career, I had the absolute perfect site. I knew a self-storage would work there. I knew there was no other self-storage in that area. I knew it would be a killer. I almost didn't get the feasibility report, but at the last minute I decided to, because I've had partners, and thank goodness I did. The person doing the feasibility report came back, told me I had a great site, killer site. Good deal. You only have one problem. Somebody has pulled a building permit for a 100,000 square foot facility less than 2 miles from you. Had I not done that feasibility report and I closed on that land, I would have been 6 to 8 months behind a monster facility. I wouldn't be standing here today. Always get those feasibility reports. So the good news is, you just order that done. 9 times out of 10, that requires nothing from you except to wait, and then once you get the feasibility report, adjust your pro forma based on the information that comes in that feasibility report. And the last phase we're going to talk about today is the financial analysis and going through their books and their records. And this is a rather large subject, but to keep it simple, my relationship to this period of time is, I have a pro forma sitting here. My pro forma has numbers in it that are assumptions I've made from what I've seen so far. Now, either in the contract or if it's not in your contract, I have a due diligence letter that you can see. It will be at creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com/132. And you can look at that due diligence letter, no matter whether it's in your contract or whether it's a separate letter. Here are some of the items I suggest you get. And from which the information you glean from these items you get, my relationship to the due diligence period is I'm replacing my assumptions with real numbers. So for example, we will get the profit, all the profit and loss statements. We will get the monthly closes from their operating system. I'm going to track out on a graph the monthly closes, their occupancy report, how the money's coming in. I want to see the yearly trends, monthly trends. I want to see if it's anywhere near what's in the package. I want to look at the amount of money that they're actually getting compared to the units rented. We go through all of those spaces as we do these books and records, and I look at what they're actually paying for lights, and look at what the tax rate is and what the insurance policy includes and doesn't include. Then I get hours priced, and I replace all those operating expenses and all those income numbers with real numbers that are currently coming from the facility. It also helps us design the strategy for when we take over. Are we going to be having a big auction to get rid of a lot of slow pays? Or are we not going to be doing anything? Is it run real well and all we have to do is take over? So we use that period to also design our first 90 days as we take a facility over. Now, I don't want to be selling real hard here, but this episode is not designed to teach you exactly what to do in every phase of that. So if you are interested in a much more detailed with the forms that we use, go to the quickstartacademy.com. We have courses on how to buy and how to build and how to expand. They're all there, and explore that. And if you want more in-depth, see if that will support you. Now, sometime during the due diligence period, I make sure that I go to the facility and spend a few days. And what we'll do is we'll go through and look at every single contract they have on file. And I really recommend you do this. So we create a spreadsheet, and what we want to make sure is that the tenant's name, the unit number, the size of the unit, and what they're paying in the file actually matches what's in the computer. And you want to look and make sure that that contract is fully executed. Why? Well, because you can't auction a contract. You can't auction a unit if you don't have a fully executed contract. If you do, you're opening yourself up for a lot of trouble. And you would be surprised, even from good operators, how many contracts we find that aren't fully executed. So go through every contract, compare it to what's in the operating system, make sure that they are fully executed. And if you see any information about credit card numbers or anything, you don't want to buy the property with that in there. That's a liability for you. So if you find some that aren't signed, just make sure that the seller gets them signed prior to closing on the deal. So you want to go through all of the due diligence, and again, replace your assumptions with real numbers. You will know that facility better than the seller. You'll know that facility better than anybody. When you close on that property, there will be no surprises, because you know exactly what to expect. You know the rhythm of how the money comes in, and you know what's needed to take that facility now to the next level. If you're buying a property that you're going to be expanding, a part of your due diligence at this phase on the books and records and the financial analysis is going to be determining whether you can do that expansion or not. So the feasibility report is going to tell you the demand side of that. In other words, is there enough demand to expand the property? But it's your engineers that are going to be informing you whether you can get the approvals to do the expansion, whether it's already been approved, what's involved. depending on how your contract is written. Some contracts have it that you won't close till you get the approvals. Other contracts, you'll close on it and then get your approval. But you got to know from your engineer whether you think you're going to have any trouble getting that approval, especially if you're going to close on it prior to it. And there are times where it's okay and very appropriate to do that. If you've already been approved for an expansion and you want to change it, for example, or that you don't want to start the expansion because there is a competitor in your sub-market that's in lease-up mode, you want to wait for them to finish leasing up and then you'll start your expansion. The feasibility report says there's enough demand for it, and you don't want to have two in lease-up mode driving the price down. So there's a lot of reasons why you may not get your approval for expansion prior to the closing. Now, again, we have an engineer of record that we've developed a relationship with over a long period of time. But when we first started, I would find civil engineers in the markets that I was going to. In fact, that's how we ended up with this engineer of record. He was a civil engineer not in my market, but in another market. But that's how we did it. We found good civil engineers. Look for one that has self-storage experience and someone that you can relate to. These engineers will be very important over your career. So again, if you're interested in more detail, the Quick Start Academy, how to build your first self-storage facility class, has details on coming out of the ground and doing expansions, particularly in this area. It goes into detail. But that's one of the spaces you're going to go through as you are in your due diligence period. So we've covered a lot today. We've covered in the due diligence the space of how to do inspections, what are ways you can do it, the feasibility report, and the financial analysis in the books and the records. So we'll finish up what to do in the due diligence period in the next episode. And thank you very much for watching this Getting Started series. My name's Mark Helm. I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Storage World Analyzer. This is the financial analysis tool that we use to generate the preliminary pro forma, and then as we update our numbers, they get updated in the analyzer, and at the end of the due diligence period, we print that out. If we can still hit our financial goals, we close on the property. So I'll look forward to being with you in the next episode. And if you're not subscribing to these episodes, go to creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com and sign up to get our blogs delivered to you. Thanks a lot. My name's Mark Helm. I'll see you later.